All right. Thank you, Mr. Norbert, for this opportunity to talk to you. It's always an honor here to talk with different people and hear their own side of the story because basically we are all in the journey in this life. So it is important that from time to time we share so that some other persons can also learn from us. All right, so we're going to be spending this time, this maybe 1 or 2 hours. I don't know how long we're going to spend here, looking at your history, where you have worked, and all these different good things. So let's start with your self presentation.
Let me thank you for letting me share my thoughts here on this webcast. I really appreciate that. So thank you very much, Ray. I'm a professional. I have my background is engineering. I actually studied chemistry in Germany, and but I have spent most of my career working in the United States. I worked actually 39 years for Goodyear as in various roles in the innovation center at Goodyear, but I had global responsibility for a long time for 3 innovation centers, one in the United States, one in Luxembourg, and one in Germany. And I was quite fortunate because the last 15 years of my career, I was asked, or mainly it was also a lot my own idea, to go and look what made other companies so successful. And one of them that we paid a lot of attention to was Toyota. And Toyota has implemented what they call lean manufacturing in their plants. And virtually all automotive companies and many other companies in the world jumped on that system, jumped on what they learned from Toyota and many other Japanese companies. And I was fortunate to have an opportunity to try to apply that same thinking to the way how we do innovation, to the way how we develop new products. And it worked very well. And I was also given the opportunity then to share what I learned in that time in a book that I published. It's called Lean Driven Innovation. And by the way, I wrote that book when after I broke my leg. I couldn't walk. I had a skiing accident and I could not walk for a whole year. So I had a lot of time on my hands, and that's when I wrote that book. And now COVID comes along, and same situation again. I'm stuck at home for a long time. So I figured, well, there's still so much in my head. There's still so much that I learned in my career that I have not shared with the rest of the world. So I have submitted the script for a second book, which kind of goes a lot further than my first book, but the subject is still the same. How can we get much better at doing innovation? How can companies get much better at bringing out new products and actually making money on those new products and grow their business and become leaders in their industry? So that the COVID actually gave me an opportunity to further. I'm doing consulting work. I did a lot of consulting work actually before COVID, but of course COVID has completely stopped. Well, not completely, but has reduced that work tremendously. I don't travel, and a lot of companies just have other stuff to worry about than what I have been able to teach them. I do some workshops, but not so much. So again, a very welcome opportunity to sit down and put my thoughts on paper. The script is with the publisher, but the book isn't printed yet. So.
All right, that's
That's
interesting.
in a nutshell what I've been doing the last few years. So.
That's interesting, and really, it's quite a lot. Of course, in the course of this podcast, we are going to have time to look at it one after the other. We would like to know from the beginning when you were born and when you were growing up as a boy. Tell
Oh,
us more
yeah.
about that. That is very interesting.
But that was some long time ago, Obehi, unfortunately. But yeah, I was born in Luxembourg, and I grew up on a farm, on a very small farm, and I was one of the baby boomers. I was born right after they started to recover from World War II. My parents and the village and so on was hit very, very, very hard in the war. And in fact, they had just, I was born right after they had been able to rebuild the houses and rebuild their lives to a good extent. Um, the, the the 50s were a little hard. The 60s became a very good time in Europe. I went to school in Luxembourg, did my high school in Luxembourg, did my grade school, well, I learned Luxembourgish as a kid, of course, did my grade school in Luxembourg in German, in the German language. Then I went to high school and it switched to French. High school in Luxembourg is taught largely in the French language. And after that, after I did my baccalaureate in Luxembourg, I went to college in Germany. I had decided to study chemistry, and Germany is, at least at that time, was an excellent country to go study chemistry. And so I spent 6 years living in Germany, studying and working there a little bit, and then I hired in with Goodyear in Luxembourg. They have an innovation center in Luxembourg, and that's where I worked a few years. And in the 80s, things in Luxembourg were not doing very well. There was a very, very serious crisis. It was a global crisis, but Luxembourg was hit very, very hard because the only really big industry that Luxembourg had was the steel industry, and the steel industry took a huge big hit at that time. And it was actually a very good time to go and move and learn other experiences. So I had the opportunity to go to the United States, but then I got kind of stuck there. I was working on a very, very big project, actually an innovation project that had discretionary funding by the company. And so I got kind of, I say stuck, but on the other side, it was okay to get stuck here in the United States. And now I live in Ohio. Actually, I live in Akron, Ohio, which is still the home of the rubber industry. And but I also spend a lot of time now in Florida. It's much warmer in Florida in the winter, so I enjoy, since I'm retired now, to spend more time in the winter in the warmer part of the United States.
Interesting. I will ask you one question relating to your early years before we move to the current situation. Of course, your work and some of the situation there. So when you were growing up, you grew up. You were born in the 50s, if I'm not wrong on
That
that.
is accurate. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So you were in the 50s. Of course, the war has ended. Now, did you had a chance to maybe have some curiosity with your parents, like asking them their experience of the war because they were physically there, they saw what happened. What did they tell you
Yes.
about the war? What was your experience in those times?
Well, my first experience is that they did not talk about it is something that I experienced a lot. The people who had lived through the war, especially Luxembourg, very hard. What had put it like that? In the At the beginning of the war, Luxembourg was occupied. Of course, that little country couldn't resist at all. There was virtually no resistance. The country was just occupied by the Germans, and the Germans established their rule in the country. Some of my relatives were forced to go and join the German army. My dad was the only worker on a farm and the only male on the farm. So he was spared from being forced into the service because the Germans knew very well that they needed the farms to grow food. Of course, the farms were obligated to donate what was it, 80 or 90% of what they produced. They had to give it to the German army. So my dad did not have to go fight, and there was the German occupation during the war, which was very, very hard on their sisters and she was had to take care of them at a very, very early age. And still living, they weren't married at that time. She was living in a different village. But then what happened after the Battle of the Bulge, when the Germans tried to push forward back into towards the to stop the Allies from coming in from the Normandy. A big battle was fought in Bastogne, which is kind of very close to where I grew up. And what happened is the Allies pushed the Germans back, and that happened to be straight through the village where I grew up. So the house where I grew up was actually completely destroyed. There was nothing left of virtually nothing left of the house. It was completely bombed. My parents survived. They were in a shelter in the same village, not very far away from that. They did survive the bombing, but they had lost everything they had. There was reparations were done. They got help rebuilding their house, but they had lost everything else. The cattle, everything. I don't know. They never knew what happened, so they may have been the Germans may have been smart enough to let them go. They knew the place would get bombed because they were hiding there. It was a difficult time, a very difficult time for them. They had to live with relatives for a while because they had no home anymore, and then starting to rebuild the farm. Of course, they still had their land, but they didn't have any animals anymore. So they had to start pretty much from scratch there. And it was funny. I still have some furniture that my granddad made, and he made it all from leftover ammunition boxes. He of course, when the Germans were pushed back, a lot of stuff was left behind, and I found a helmet in my parents' house, a German helmet that was left in the field somewhere, and there were lots of ammunition boxes left behind, and they were normally Allied ammunition boxes, not German ones. And that's what my granddad used to make furniture for the house. And I still have some of those pieces. And when I cleaned it up, and I still saw the original print on there that it was a howitzer box that he made furniture from. Yeah, that's what people had at that time, and that's what they used. But the recovery was relatively good. So in the 60s, when I started to go to school, a lot of the war was behind the people. The standard of living was still relatively low at that time, but a lot of the war sufferings were put behind, but nobody wanted to talk about. I have very, very little information. Only direct questions would be answered, and they would not be answered with a lot. They would be just yes and no answers. The experience that I had is that people who lived through the war did not want to talk about it. So,
Mhm. Thank you for that. Of course, war is not it's not a good experience to talk about. In Nigeria, for example, we had a 3 years war where a lot of people died. Only for 3 years,
yeah, yeah.
we lost so many people in Nigeria. And until date, very little is said about it. Okay, sometimes it can also be for the fact that it's not a good memory. But of course, in case of the European war, Yes, a lot of documentation is available to sort of help the people to understand what have gone on. Of course, this after many years have passed on. So what I'm trying to understand there is from your experience, was there a reason where they decide not to talk much about the war, or was it a kind of individual reason, something like that?
Well, my experience was that it was not just my parents. Other people who suffered through the war did not like to talk about it either. And there were a lot of books written about the war, but they were written. Some were written by the generation that went through the war. Very few. But I noticed that the next generation would start collecting artifacts and start to write about it. Museums were created and so on. War museums were created, but that all happened one generation later. The people who lived through the war, that was my experience. Really, nobody was so much interested in talking about. Of course, there were. There was just like, for example, the people who were put in concentration camps and so on. They tried to make sure that that memory stayed, that it wasn't forgotten what happened. But on the other side, I also noticed that a lot of people were interested more in healing, getting this over with, and rebuilding relationships and so on. And during my generation, I remember when I was in high school, my colleagues, they were much more interested in rebuilding, I mean, not forgetting what happened, but they were more interested in not letting what happened get in the way of rebuilding Europe, rebuilding the relationship with other nations, and so on and so on. And by the time I went to Germany for college, I mean, pretty much that everything was forgotten, and not forgotten, not forgotten, but nobody let get any of that get in the way of building new friendships and new relationships between countries. So.
I really want to pick out one thing from there. That of course we are moving on now. We are not going to go any further in the world experience, even though actually it's part of our history. So we cannot forget it. So for the historian, for those who are able to narrate what has happened, going to treasure those experiences because it's part of our human experience. We cannot run away from it. But today we are not going to concentrate on that. But I want to pick out something that you said, no, which had to do with the healing. That there was a deliberate effort to concentrate on the healing because we are
Yes.
not perfect as a human beings as we are. We do make mistakes. We do go wrong sometimes, but we should allow ourselves to continuously suffer for the error that we have made. So we must make effort to heal ourselves, to heal the world, and to move on. So that is very, very important.
Correct.
So as we are moving away from that conversation, the people that were living at the time, say in the 50 and early 60, moving forward, did you know whether maybe the impact of the war affected their choice of career? Like now, there is no war anymore, but you are living in a war, of course, that have just had a bad experience. Does that influence their choice of career? Because you decide to go and study engineering, and was it engineering? I'm making a mistake
Yes.
there.
Yeah. Engineering, chemistry.
Engineering.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, did anything influence your own decision, much like every other person at the time?
Not really. The one thing that did influence it very heavily, Luxembourg is an extremely small country, and today it's part of the European Union, and the European Union has opened opportunities for everybody. But when I grew up, the European Union was not even, well, yeah, there were a little bit of agreements. In fact, the Luxembourg had a little union with Belgium and Holland at that time, but it did not make a huge, big impact. But there were really, really, really very limited choices. For example, there were no universities in Luxembourg. If you wanted to go to university, you had to leave the country. And there again, some countries, most countries were actually relatively open to accept students from Luxembourg, but the education programs weren't aligned at all. So it was sometimes very difficult to get in or to catch up. So that was very limited. The other thing that was extremely limited at that time, there wasn't the freedom to move around. It was not just like you go, and if you don't find work in Luxembourg, you go work in another country. Today you can do that. The European Union allows you to do that today. But when I grew up, that was not the case. And so very, very limited opportunities for a career at that time. And in fact, when I hired in with Goodyear, Goodyear was virtually at that time the only company in Luxembourg where you could apply for a job, especially in the 80s when there was as I said, when there was a significant crisis, and I had to call myself fortunate at that time to even find a job right away. I could have, of course, since I had a degree from Germany, I would have had the opportunity already at that time to go work in Germany. So it was not that it was not possible, but it wasn't. It was already a little bit more difficult to do. But the lack of opportunity at that time in that small country was a big factor. Today, of course, very, very much different. Luxembourg is a great country to live in today. And with what the European Union brought to it is absolutely changed all that, of course, changed all that to the better.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, of course. In the time of crisis, we suffer together. In the time of peace, too, we also enjoy it together because Luxembourg is being a small country that is surrounded by a bigger country. Of course, if the economy is flourishing in Germany, it's just impossible that it cannot reach a small country like Luxembourg and all that. Of course, thanks to the European Union, like you are saying, that is one of the things that I actually appreciate also of the union that are formed by people and by countries like the European Union, because they try also to protect their common interests. That have to be always on the line, because it is very, very important that people organize themselves and protect their common interests. Now, I'm trying to see, when you first started with Goodyear, what was your experience like? Was it that you went there to search for work, they called you, or how did you get to Goodyear to start with?
Well, Goodyear was one of the very few companies at that time that hired people in Luxembourg. The steel industry had gone through a very, very, very rough time, and there was early 80s. There was a very significant crisis in the world, but it had hit Europe much, much, much harder. You also have to remember that at that time there weren't any of those agreements. There was not a common currency. There was not these open borders and so on. There was some agreements between the countries. I could have gone work in a different country. But there again, the crisis had hit virtually all the Central European countries. So, and Goodyear hired because they had established a global innovation center in Luxembourg. The innovation center in Luxembourg was not only responsible for the plant in Luxembourg, but it was responsible for all Europe and the Middle East and Africa, and at that time even Latin America. So that's why Goodyear needed the talent there, and that's why they were hiring people. So that's how, and I did take the job knowing that the jobs were hard to come by, and you never know what happens. Well, let's look and wait and see. But then a few years later, I was always an innovator. I always had many more ideas than I could actually reduce to practice. And one of my ideas that I had submitted through an idea submission system had been approved for funding, and very significant funding. And that brought me to the United States on a temporary assignment, which then turned into a permanent assignment.
Right, that is interesting. I'm going to talk about that invention, that innovation that brought you to the United States.
We had a system where if you had a great new idea, you could submit it, and then people looked at it, and if it was considered a worthwhile idea, they provided direct funding for it. And I did do that, and that is actually was my first big project when I came to the United States to work on that innovation, and it was successful. Actually, probably 5, 6, 7 years later, a plant was built here in the United States to produce that product that I had invented. And that is actually what brought me to the United States and what kept me here. Actually, it kept me here for so much time that by the time I had an opportunity to move back to Europe. I have 2 boys, and they were already in the school at that time, in the American school system. And I mean, that would have been very hard to move back at that time and make them leave all their friends and their schools and so on and start over. So that. But on the other side, it's not the United States is not a bad country to live in either. So I have to make that very clear. So.
All right, that is important. Of course, there are a lot of people that are trying to get to the United States from all corners of the world. So we certainly cannot say it's a bad country to live in. Of course, yeah, sure. We cannot say that. All right, now you said a lot about your invention and your innovation. Can you spend some time explaining what exactly do you work on in invention? What do you invent? What do you work on in innovation? Tell us about it.
Well, in this case, it was a new product. It was a new product that was very important for the truck, the truck industry, and it also used a very innovative new process. It's that's very popular. Virtually every piece of plastic today is made by injection molding, and so that is also a technology that is very popular to produce rubber, to process rubber. It's very difficult and it's very expensive, but in this case it did work, and Goodyear did build a plant in Texas, but then due to other reasons, the financial reasons mostly, Goodyear got into a crisis at the end of the 80s. The plant manufacture in the United States could not be expanded, but the product is still out there. And but the company had to decide to outsource the product. That was, and what we are talking about, they invested many millions into the research, the development of this product. The product was worked well, was quite successful, but as I said, products are not the only thing. The company got into a big financial crisis a few years after the product was launched, and even though the product worked well, it had to be eventually outsourced because the capital was not there to expand the manufacturing here in the United States. So. But that's how things go, and that's very important in part of also innovation. It's an idea is not all what innovation is about. To turn the idea into a successful product is difficult, and then to sustain the product in the industry and in the world with everything that happens is the next big part of an innovation.
Goodyear is in Ohio.
Well, Goodyear was founded here in Ohio, actually in the city where I live right now, Akron, Ohio. And not only Goodyear, all the other tire companies were here. The American tire companies were here. Firestone was here, General Tires was here. But then as in the 80s, all those American companies were purchased, like Bridgestone purchased Firestone, and they moved to Nashville, Tennessee, and then Michelin bought Goodrich, and they moved to the Carolinas, and then Continental bought General Tire, and they also moved to the Carolinas. So at the end of the day, Goodyear was the only tire company left here in Akron, Ohio. Goodyear has since is not producing a lot of tires here anymore. Goodyear only makes race tires here in Akron. Everything else, and of course the research and development the center is here in Akron, Ohio. With over 1,000 people, and but then the rest of the research and development is done in Luxembourg and is done in Germany, in a town close to Frankfurt.
All right. Now, is there any reason, maybe for logistic or maybe for raw material, that made all the tire company to be concentrated at one time in Ohio?
Yeah, a long time ago, there may have been, there was a little bit of automotive industry. When the automotive industry started in the United States, there was a part of it that actually started in this area, in the Cleveland area, but then it very quickly moved to Detroit. Detroit is very close to Akron, Ohio, and there really was not a reason at that time to relocate. So I think that's what made the companies stay here. Of course, now after all the consolidation and everything had happened, there is very little tire manufacturing done here in Akron. Goodyear still has the race tire plant, and I think Firestone has recently reinvested into experimental manufacturing here, so which is kind of a good thing. But the main reason I think for the companies to stay for this long was the talent that was here. And you could easily find the experts here in this area, and maybe that was the reason why the technical organizations have stayed here, maybe why Goodyear has stayed here.
Another curiosity I'm beginning to have now is the raw material, maybe probably coming from outside, because I originally am from Nigeria. So in Nigeria, in the state where I am from, okay, go. Maybe you know what I'm going to say. Go. Add your voice.
Well, no, raw materials. Natural rubber, of course, is a commodity that comes from countries. Especially, there is natural rubber production in Africa. That's why I was laughing, and I believe the countries around the equator. I'm not exactly familiar what role Nigeria would play in that, but still most natural rubber is coming from the Far East, Malaysia, Indonesia. That's where the trees grow the best. Some of it was also done in Latin America, but it never really took hold. Some of it is produced in Africa still. I'm pretty sure about that, but that became a huge big issue, of course, during the war, where the Germans invented synthetic rubber, and so today virtually all other raw materials than the natural rubber can be produced anywhere in the world. But natural rubber is still coming from those favorite places where it grows the best, and the best quality comes from there. And quite honestly, the industry has not succeeded to replace natural rubber, has not succeeded to replace the rubber that grows on the tree. You can synthetically produce the same rubber, but it's not the same quality. So, and the other good thing, what I like about natural rubber, it's a renewable resource. It grows on a tree, and it's not that you don't dig it out of the ground and it's gone forever. It's renewable. You can plant more trees, and you get more natural rubber, and the trees are good for the environment too. So it's actually I'm glad that that it still plays a major role. Unfortunately, it also has a big economic impact when the yields are bad. 1 year, of course, the prices all skyrocket and throw everything with it. But that's just the way it is. No difference from any agricultural product there.
Yeah, that's correct. During this year that you were there in New Year, and I think you are still, sorry, in Goodyear, I think you're still there, even though you are retired. Do you still collaborate with them?
Yeah, but not a lot. I still have contact more with my friends than anything else. I did do some workshops there for the Shingo Institute here in the United States that I did there, where they opened the plant. I also had some when I did a conference on innovation a few years ago in Columbus, Ohio, and they let the participant visit the innovation center, those kind of things, but not a lot more. I definitely I left good things behind. I did even write a book about what I learned there. So they have excellent documentation. I had written many training classes that of course stayed with the companies, so they would not need me to help them with anything of that. But that's about the contact that I have.
And I understand that you were working as an international representative in the company. Can you explain to us what exactly you were doing in New Year in those areas?
Yeah, I said global responsibility. That means the process that I developed for R&D. Of course, it was developed in the United States, but then it was expanded into the Innovation Center in Luxembourg and the Innovation Center in Hanau in Germany. That's what I meant, and with global responsibility, and I kind of kept that responsibility. So I had to go there quite often, travel to those centers, both for education, for workshops, and so on, and for help with when they needed it. But to be quite honest, they did not need a lot of help. We had a very good education system at Goodyear, and very early on realized that the expansion and the sustainability of all this work is directly linked to education. And we did a very good job educating our own people. And to be quite honest, after I did the education in Luxembourg and in Germany, they picked up most of the work on their own, and that was good. That's how it's supposed to work, by the way. I'm still doing a lot of that today. I say I'm a consultant, but I'm really not a consultant. I'm really only a teacher. I like to teach people how to, so that they learn and then they can do it themselves. It's like rather than feeding the people. The World Bank has preached this for a very long time. You can feed somebody by giving him a fish, but you can also teach that person to fish and to be self-sustainable. And in the long term, the impact of that education pays off 1,000 times. And that's something I learned many, many times myself. So I'd rather teach and coach people to get started, and then they can do the work on their own. Okay, it's I eliminated my job there. That's okay. That did happen. So what? Then I just go and teach somebody else, or happily stay retired.
That's really interesting. All right. Now, in this course of training, in this course of creating Center for Innovation, of course, looking at new Goodyear where you have worked, were there anyone apart from Europe and America where you have this a Center for Innovation for training that you know of?
Well, at Goodyear, the decision was made to build a center in Luxembourg in the 60s, and that was a very good decision. And the German center came from the merger of Goodyear with Sumitomo in the 90s. And the Goodyear also has a center in China, in Shanghai, and a very small operation in Brazil. The reason that had to be done is to get closer to the customers. You can do the research in a central location, but let's call it intelligence, finding out what different parts of the world need. You could even do that market research by having a very small office in different places of the world. But if you want to get close to the customer, work with the customers directly and close with the customers, you have to be located close to the customer. And it's not enough that you just have a person there. You really, it helped a lot to manufacture the experimental tires in Luxembourg, and it helps a lot to have a test track in Brazil where you can then produce the tires in the plant in Brazil, and the next day have the customer out there and test the tires together with the customer on the test track that they have in Brazil. So that is the main reason. That was the driving force. The general research you could do in a central location, but not the direct work with the customer. And I think a lot of other companies have made very similar experiences. So, besides the rubber industry or beyond the rubber industry, so, or the tire industry.
And talking specifically of Brazil and the center that you had there, what was that center actually doing? Was it to collect was it up to the point of producing the tires, or just collecting the material and then sending it over to the factory in the US? Or what role was that having that in Brazil?
Well, the tires, of course, are made in Brazil. Brazil has a very big car industry. A lot of big companies like Toyota, they build tires. They build cars in Brazil. If you want to participate in that market, you have to produce the tires in Brazil. Even though some of the engineers did the design work in the United States, there were engineers involved when the tire was produced in Brazil, the submission tires that then the customer would test, and then the testing was done with local engineers and the customers, and if changes had to be made, they were made directly in the plant in Brazil. So that's how that business works.
All right. Thank you for that. Before you were saying that Goodyear now produce more of racy tires. I don't know if I get that right. Was that what?
Yes,
Okay.
that's what I said.
Is there any explanation for that? Why they don't? Because a lot of people are still buying cars these days. Why did they have to shift to only racy tires?
Well, Goodyear has a very long history of racing, and Goodyear was very heavily involved in Formula One and also what was at that time IndyCar racing in the United States, mostly open wheel racing. And in the 90s, the decision was made not to support the open wheel racing anymore and concentrate on North American racing, which is NASCAR. That's it used to be called stock car. It's a different type of racing. It's not open wheel. It's cars that look almost like the cars that drive on the street. And it is a very, very popular sports event here in the United States, especially in the southern states of this country. And Goodyear made the decision to focus more on NASCAR. And Goodyear has the exclusive with NASCAR, the exclusive tire supply, and those tires are produced in Akron, Ohio. Still produced in Akron, Ohio.
When you were still, of course, operating there because you were taking an important position there, when you want to go into a country to maybe, okay, in the case of Brazil, like you said, because there are a lot of big companies in Brazil who are participated in the market, and of course, it becomes justifiable if you want to invest millions of dollars in a company there. So maybe, for example, you want to enter the Italian market or the French market. What really are the decision that make you enter into some of these markets, or do you just go there because you want to make favor to the country?
Yeah, okay. Let's step back in history a little bit. Before the European Union was established the way it is today, Goodyear actually had a tire plant in Italy, and at that time, Goodyear had tire plants in many, many different countries. But then over time, with the new open markets and so on, a lot of those plants got consolidated. But if you want to enter the market, like in a market in a new country, let's take Italy. I'm sure Goodyear still sells a lot of tires in Italy. I do know that we worked a lot with the Italian car manufacturers, with especially Fiat, and Fiat pretty much owns the Italian car market. Now, that's how you would start working. You would submit samples to Fiat, and the Fiat would approve those tires. It was easier in the past. Mr. Ferrari had decided when he's still an independent company, he loved Goodyear and he wanted Goodyear on the Ferrari cars, but Ferrari since has changed ownerships, that's how you get into the automotive market. If you want to work in the renewal market, of course, that market has changed very significantly too. You get on the internet these days, by the way. That has become both in the United States and in Europe a major force. Buying tires, and they changed the market completely. People look on the internet for feedback on your products, and that's very important today. And they get all the options in one page, and they can get the feedback on performance, on price, and so on. It's very easy to do that kind of research now. And a lot of people do that research, and a lot of people do buy their tires online, and then they get shipped to a place that mounts them for them. And why not? That's one way. And of course, other ways are to work with big retailers or work with small shops, and many different ways. But I would not know any details anymore about how Goodyear would do business in these different countries. But Europe has no borders anymore, and the internet doesn't have any borders all over the world. So, and that becomes more and more, and that has affected everybody who makes stuff and sells stuff today. So.
Positively, of course, when we don't have border anymore, meaning we can do business, and we don't have any limitation anymore. That is a good thing. What do you think?
It is a good thing, but it's also a difficult thing. And what I have found going through this, especially in the 90s, even living in the United States, when all the borders opened, I mean, there's no protection anymore. You are now faced with global competition. You have to compete with countries where the manufacturing cost is only a fraction of your own country. You have to compete with different with different quality, with different performance that you didn't have to worry about before. And a lot of companies adapted very well to that new business, and other companies did not. And the companies who did not, their days were numbered, of course, because how can you survive in an environment like that when you are not able to adapt? And especially in Europe, it was very brutal, that open competition. In the United States, it has been much slower, and especially in the tire industry, the politics got involved in it a little bit. But in Europe, it's a market that is very much dominated by open market competition, and now all of a sudden those countries who paid much higher wages had to figure out other ways to compete, and a lot of them did. And actually a lot of them use what I was talking about earlier, lean manufacturing and similar things. If you look at Japan pays very high salaries, but they're very competitive. They're very competitive because of their efficiency and their quality. And there are ways for countries to survive and to even thrive in that environment. And a lot of them are giving us the example. Like the German car industry is always a big one for me. They have always thrived on their performance, on their quality, and but also make no mistake, they are extremely efficient. I have had the chance to visit some. It is unbelievable how much work how much they invested into that efficiency, and that's what keeps them, what will sustain them for many, many years. And if the market changes again, and it will, I'm absolutely sure they will figure it out again, and do whatever is right to do to keep that leadership position.
And you were making mention of, for example, of Fiat being the dominant player in the Italian auto industry, and of course, maybe like the General Motors in the United States or BMW in Germany. I was in Germany in their Munich exposition office. It's really a beautiful thing. Of course, you can see that these are people that are deeply rooted on the ground. That is nothing that's going to shake them. That's going to shake them anytime soon. So, of course, these are big companies and they have their base well structured. So, where actually I'm going is that do you think the companies in the West that have the network, the infrastructure, really should be afraid of competition when the market is open, like we have it today? Or should it be the company in countries like maybe India or in Brazil or just before now in China? Of course, China now has taken off. That should actually be afraid. That is the question.
Yeah, let me split that into two parts. Since you talked about Fiat earlier, I think Mr. Marchioni had been a very, very smart man, and I know that Fiat is very, very well positioned to continue playing the role they have been playing. Mr. Marchioni did not walk away from big challenges, and he took them right on, and I think he made the right decisions. A lot of the things that he started have not matured yet, so I believe that Fiat, just like many other global players in the car industry, are well positioned to maintain the position they have had. But what I always told the engineers, and here's an important point. Yes, companies have outsourced to countries with lower labor costs, but other countries have not. Other companies have been able to produce in their country and paying the labor and thriving that way. And a good example is the German car companies, and I hope that Fiat, I believe Fiat is on a similar track. But what I really had to live through, and I think we made the right decisions there too. And I still teach that every time I teach a workshop here in the United States. There's nothing easier to outsource than engineering work. All you need is a computer in a different country. That's all you need today. You have your global networks and everything. You have all the access, everything. And at one time, companies started to very significantly outsource engineering work, and especially into India, because the talent is there. It is very easy to find very talented engineers in countries like India. And by the way, you find them in China just as well. I still believe China graduates more PhDs every year than maybe the rest of the world combined. It's even hard to have a count because you don't even have the data to know. But the talent that I personally have seen in those countries is absolutely remarkable. And so why would big companies not outsource their engineering, their basic engineering and research into those countries? The talent is there. You can save them a lot of money. They will remain connected, especially now with the virus. I mean, with coronavirus, people work from home anyway, and for me, I always have to ask them, "Hey, where are you?" And I don't even know what country they are in anymore. And that to me is a huge, big danger. And that is a huge, big danger for the people who do intellectual work. Intellectual work like creativity, like creative work, engineering work, and so on, can be extremely easily outsourced. And there's only one remedy to that. You have to become better in your own country. And that's what I tell the people. You have the people think they have the talent to innovate and they're the best at that. Good, okay. Well, then try to use some of that talent not only to concentrate on what you do, but on how you do it, because it's the how you do it that keeps you competitive globally. And that's actually what I write a lot about, to get people's attention to the fact that they have to work differently, and it's not going to change anymore. It's what they will have to do from here on out, and maybe it's what they should have done in the first place all these years. You have to be the best at what you do and how you do it, and that's how companies strive. That's how companies prosper today. That's how they grow. That's how they become global leaders today. It's not enough to know the engineering work. You have to get better at doing engineering work. It's not enough to be creative today. You have to be better at being creative. You have to be better than everybody else at being creative, and that's how you grow and that's how you prosper. And that is a message that some people understand it, but unfortunately, a lot of companies do not understand it. Well, okay, they will one of these days get to the point where they have to understand it and have to change. Now, change is a difficult thing. If you are forced to change, that's when most companies change, when they are forced to change, when when things have become so bad that they know they cannot survive anymore. That's when they change. Then they go through a major layoff and reorganization, restructuring, and then they change. But the time to change is before that happens, because then you are ready to hit the ground running, and then you are really using the change to your advantage. And it's very, very, very hard to convince companies that it's time to change when things are going well. And it's extremely hard. And I'm working with one client right now. I'm doing workshops, and I hear that every day. Why do we change? Why do you say we need to change? We're doing good. And I try to keep telling them that's the time that you need to think about changing. So how can you sustain what you are doing today with anything that can happen to you out there, and that you are still doing good in 10 years, 20 years from now? And as I said, extremely hard for companies to understand, but that is really what makes the great companies great companies, that they looked ahead a few years and made sure they had everything in place when the economy or the technology or whatever came about. And so I keep preaching that some people listen, some people will listen, some people will not listen. But that's that's a pet subject of mine, by the way, as you may have noticed. So,
All right. Now, having said that you have said, now we will spend some time on innovation now. Because you were born in the 50s and you saw what happened after the war. Of course, the world is completely different from the 50s and the 60s. The kind of world we have today is completely different. It's dominated by extreme sophisticated technology. And according to analysts, we are only in the beginning of it. So
yes.
what do you really think is driving innovation?
Many different things. There is a popular saying that need is driving innovation, and a very good example of that is what happened in the war in Germany. They didn't have they couldn't get crude oil anymore, so they said, "Hey, we have plenty of coal. So why don't we make gasoline out of coal?" and it worked very well for the Germans during the war. Of course, now economically it's hasn't been so great, but only economically. If the need comes back, it will happen again. But let me tell you another story about the Germans in the war. It's very close to a big innovation that I did at Goodyear. It was in retreading truck tires. When the Germans were in Africa, actually it was Rommel who had an operation there. They could not get tires anymore, and so they wore out the tires, and they couldn't get tires anymore. So the Germans came up with a very innovative retreading process. They cut the treads of tires where there was some tread left, and they buried them in the sand, actually, to put enough pressure on them. And the sand was, believe it or not, the sand was hot enough to cure them. And they had developed that process. And a person who was there at that time after the war, he created a company, and the company is still around. It's called Bendeck. His name was, he was from Mannheim, I think, and in fact, his name is hidden in the Bendeck name. Bendeck then got purchased by Bridgestone, but I know for a fact they are still using that process that Mr. Novak had experienced in Africa at that time when they invented it, because they couldn't get tires. So that's the story of the need causing people to think innovatively. But then if you look at today's environment, and yes, okay, you can still find customer needs, but most innovation today creates the customer need. When I had a flip phone and a computer, I never saw any need. Why would I need an iPhone? Okay, but then a smart person at Apple, he decided to create. He said, "We have the technology. All I have to do now is find people who buy it." And he was extremely good at that, and that was really his forte of doing innovation. Let me give you another piece of information here on innovation. I'm sure you all know what I have here. These are sticky notes, okay? And in the back it says "Post it." And the gentleman who invented these, I know him personally, and he lives in Minneapolis, and his name is Art Fry. And Art told us the story how he invented them. He was singing in a church choir, and the bookmarks were falling out of his songbook when he stood up and held this book in front of him. So he kept thinking, and he had seen, this glue that's on here. He had seen that in the lab. Actually, they were using it for a different purpose. And then Art put that glue on the sticky notes, and they were sticking to his book. But when he pulled them out, the glue stayed with the book and not with the note. So he solved that problem very quickly then, and he had invented the sticky note. But it took him at least 3 years to convince anybody in his company and in the world that there was a need for sticky notes. And it's wonderful to listen when I told that story, how he tried to, with some friends at 3M and so on, convince the rest of the world, hey, you need sticky notes. And to me, that is a very under-leveraged part of innovation still out there. A lot of the schools still teach innovation as you find a customer pain point, you find something, you find a problem that customers have, and you try to solve that problem. But I believe that there's a lot more opportunity into this kind of information where the technology has been developed, and the world has developed an enormous amount of technology. It's just mind-boggling, the number of scientists that develop technology every day. But I do think that that the companies have not leveraged that part of the information enough. Looking at the Apples, looking at the Googles, looking at the sticky notes to take technical opportunities and to develop a market for it. And that is still, to me, that is today a very big piece of innovation, and that has yet to be leveraged enough. And that kind of thinking I did in my new book. I wrote a lot about that subject because I think that's an important subject for people to understand, to learn, and to put more attention to.
All right. Now, when you talk of innovation, of course, you made mention of the Germans taking advantage of the cold during the war because they couldn't get petroleum anymore. I will also share a similar story with you. During the Nigerian Civil War, when the Nigerian army was pounding so much on the Biafra that the Biafra couldn't have anything anymore, they invented a weapon. By the way they designed the weapon, it's a kind of a weapon of mass destruction, as it were. It dealt a very heavy blow to the Nigerian soldiers that were fighting then at the time. Yeah, I agree with you that circumstances can actually be powering innovation. But having said that, what should be guiding our innovation? Because now we can innovate things that are very dangerous, no? But we can also innovate things that can help to make our life better. Should we be free to invent just anything, or should there be some rules on what should be invented?
That is a very, very important point. And in fact, again, you hit the nerve here with me on that one. And I believe that the world, especially the industrial world, has lost a lot of its ethics. They don't. Ethics used to be a part of big decisions, and I think there are many examples. Let me give you just one or two. The Volkswagen. I'm sure you have heard about the Volkswagen crisis. That what got Volkswagen in trouble. It was just cheating, lying to the people. Boeing is a more recent example. The Boeing 737 airplane, a more recent example. And I could go on and show you another half hour on our other examples. Similar examples where ethical thinking took the backstage of making money, and let's take the war apart. Of course, bad things happen to wars, but bad things also happen in the industry, and the industry is so focused on profits and other things, and that the company even forget the long-term growth in the equation, and very often even sacrifice the long-term growth and sacrifice the jobs of their employees for that short-term profit. And it is sad to see how ethics or how doing the right thing has been abandoned by many companies. And I really hope that that comes back. And there's just one, the most important thing in this equation is the people that get hurt, and that's the part that bothers me. For example, if you have a bad quarter in the free market, if a company has a bad quarter, their stock takes a big dive, and the best way to get that stock back up is to lay off people. And while in Europe and other countries, that's more difficult, but in the United States, that is still something that they do, that they like to do. So here you lost some money this quarter, and okay, a very large number of people lose their jobs, and immediately Wall Street rewards those companies. The stock goes back up, and that is a very, very sad thing, because it is those people who sacrificed, who gave everything to that company to get them there. And it's also, by the way, those people who get them out of the hard times that they are in. And it is unfortunately the care for the people who also takes the back seat together with the ethics thinking. And I hope that one of these days companies will find a way back to more ethical decisions and to more people-focused decisions. I hope that one of these days they find their way back there. Some companies have done very well at this, by the way, and it's something I discovered in the last 20 years, how really important and meaningful this can be. And there are very good examples of companies who say, hey, if I treat my people right, I can do anything I want to, because if I treat my people right, they do everything for me. And that's what I need. That's what we need to be innovative. That's why we need to be to sustain. Some company owners say that's all they have to do: focus on the people, and you get all the rest as a collateral. Well, it may not be that easy, but I do believe that in the near future, ethics and the care for people will have to play a much bigger role. But I also I think I'm getting off the subject of innovation now. That's not the only things that matter for innovation. But let me go and spend a few minutes on innovation. The idea, a lot of people think innovation is just having great ideas. Okay, well, that is something that is definitely an important point. But today, that is not enough, and and from the idea to a successful product, there is a lot more, and there's probably, the idea is only a few percent at the end of the day of the effort that goes into a good innovation. And I have spent, for me, some great companies when it comes to innovation are, of course, the Googles, the company like Uber, and many more of these, Amazon, and many more like that. And they have found a way to efficiently create that innovation. And I'm back to what I said before about research and development work. You have to be the best at what you research, but you also have to be the best at how you do your research. And the same is for innovation. You have to be the best at how you create that innovation. And that's where the Apples and the Googles and the Amazons have shown us the way. That's how studying how they did it and see how you can learn from them, I think, is an extremely important part for the industry today. Since I like to be a little bit critical, I'm quite critical of the universities, the people where companies go to learn, and I think they are always a few years behind, and rightly so. Their work is based on research, and you can only do that research when you have the data, and the data is yet to come for a lot of that stuff, so they can study it. But things happen so fast, and I think here is where I think they will have to speed up a little bit and catch up on what's going on out there, and then make sure they teach it to their students. Then when their students go to companies to work, they are able to apply that new thinking, that new stuff. And so I'm looking forward to see that happen out there. That a lot of things like what I teach today is making it into the curriculum of universities and so on. That it's
In fact, that
passed
is
on to
something
the right
very
people.
important, Norbert. That is something very important, the one that you are saying, particularly the part that had to do with education. In that, of course, you know that education is receiving a big hit now for very many angles. In that, the education that we have, the system, the structure that we have it, like you said, it's not serving the people enough. Sometimes it's a little bit late, But the question is, what is actually the solution? How do we have a kind of educational system that is not based on the system? That should be based on the era of technology, How
Yeah.
do we even create that kind of educational system?
Well, let me start with the companies, okay? And I've seen it again and again. It happened to me. You come in with all these great ideas, and you want to do things differently, but then when you come into a company, you realize that's not the way it works. If you want to become successful in that companies, you have to first of all play it by the company rules, played by the company culture, and so on and so on and so on and so on. And by the time you are done with that, you can't be innovative and creative anymore. I'm sorry to say that, because now you are in a mold, you are in a rut that will make it extremely difficult for you. But the school system is kind of a little bit the same. These young kids come in very excited, very creative, and the first thing they have to do is they have to learn rules and behaviors and so on, which is important too. So don't get me wrong, that's very important too. And then you teach them all that, and by the time they learn all that. Now conformity has taken over, and a lot of their innovative, their naturally innovative behaviors play a secondary role, because you are not getting success in school by continuing those behaviors that are not really. Some of them are not really aligned with what the school tries to teach you, and that makes it very difficult. But that's the way it is. That's the way it happens. Or let me give you another example. I learned in college how to do research, and okay, I had to do it. I had to write a thesis, and I had to get a stamp and a grade on that thesis. So I had to do it that way. But I found out that that's not the way companies should do research anymore. Companies cannot afford to do that anymore. And in the 80s, yes, we were still doing it. But today, companies can't afford to do that anymore. Companies today have to do their research like the Googles and the Amazons are doing their research. And because it happens so fast out there today, and it is so expensive to do the research the way I was taught it in college, that the two things is that the speed is one thing, things happen so fast, and it is so expensive, and so companies have to change. They will have to change the way they do innovation, and a lot of them do. A lot of them do it very well, and other ones have to learn to do it faster and more efficiently and more productive. And as I said, it is out there. I don't say that I know it all. I only know what I have learned, but there are many, many people out there who know it. There are many companies out there who know it, and a lot of companies have to learn and get better at doing innovation, as I keep saying. And some people have shown the way, and it can be learned. I hope one day it can be learned at the colleges, and but it can definitely be learned in the industry. There are enough people out there who teach it, and it will work very well. So I hope they don't wait until it's too late. I hope they jump on it right now, and change their processes, change their thinking, especially change their culture, because the culture is what gets in the way of innovation. A lot of companies have been burned so many times by new things that they are extremely risk adverse, extremely conservative, and a lot of executives see the innovation not on their management cycle, because they're only there for 4 or 5 years, and it used to be it takes 10 years to come up with a new innovation. Well, that will happen. My successor will have to take care of it. Well, that has changed. That will happen on their shift now. It has to happen next year or the following. So it will happen on their shift. And as I said, there's still a lot of learning to happen out there. So.
All right. Now, some of these company execs, they do really understand, because of course they read the Washington Journal and the New York Times. Of course, they understand what is going on, no? But why did they go to their company and they still are not running at the speed of light? Because that is how the system is today, though. Like you correctly said, everything is speed now. So
Correct.
Is it that the idea of innovation is not being sold correctly to some of these company execs, that they're not making the right decision to promote innovation, or what? Why are they not running?
Yeah, well, the execs, I hope the execs are not the ones who now start to have the ideas, okay? Because they are relatively far remote from the technology and the customer and so on. So I hope that the execs let the people who are good at innovation and who are the experts at it, let them do it the way it should be done. And so very often it would be just supporting them and taking the obstacles out of their way more than anything else. So, but how innovation is done today, of course, it all starts with new thinking. It starts with the studying of the environment, which, by the way, changes extremely fast. And as I said, it's a lot about finding opportunities, finding customer problems, leveraging technology, and maybe many other ones. But the companies who do it very well, I noticed they experiment fast. They don't get stuck with a 3-year scientific study. It's the startups that have no money and have no time. They do it with the bare minimum, and it turned out that bare minimum is actually the best way to do it, because if you work like they work, you can assess 100 new ideas for the price of a single one if you do it in the traditional system. And I think that kind of thinking and also that kind of agility, where even executives know that what we thought would work today doesn't work next month, and we have to be agile to realize that, and change next month again, and the next month we have to change again, because things out there don't accommodate anymore what we have been working on. So it's that kind of thinking that I think makes the innovation possible. It's that flexibility, it's that agility, but it's not only the agility in the technical part of the innovation, but it's also that agility in the marketing, in the acceptance, in everything that is related to that plays a role. It's the agility to play the games of the politicians, or you name it, because the last few years there have been very, very significant changes in the global politics, in the global in global what you call it, in global markets, in policies that were created that affected global markets. All that has to be part of the innovation, and all that changes every day or every other day. And it's that kind of thinking, to be ready to embrace that and not say, hey, I'm going to force my innovation on the market because next year it's going to be ready. That's not the way it works anymore. The thinking is, I need to change that innovation, the development of that innovation every day, so it keeps pace with all the other changes that go on. That and in fact, the launch is not like it used to be. Next year we launch a new product. That's not the way it goes anymore. We launch the new product when it's the best time to make money on it, and that can be next month, or it can be in 2 years from now. So even that plays a role in it, and I believe it's that agility and the agility to deal with that uncertainty, to use that uncertainty to your advantage, to become fast, to become agile, that will play a big role in innovation in the near future.
Now, that is, if we are talking about the future, then of course, future generation are definitely the protagonists of that reality. How do we get more young people into innovation? Because if they are innovating, they are not going to run out of something to do. Company will always look for them because they know how to adapt. So how do we do that?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, the society, the schools, and so on, do not necessarily promote that. And so I believe, let's also face it, artistic innovation and technical innovation may not be exactly the same thing. But anyway, I think schools from the very beginning have to be a little bit cognizant of that fact, that they can do a lot of damage, and that they do not necessarily promote that. I've seen a lot of companies create these innovation rooms, and oh man, they are super. You go in there, there's free food in there, and the walls are hanging full of stuff. And but at the end of the day, when the people who work in these rooms come up with this great idea, it's like, oh no, we cannot do that. That obstacle is still one of the biggest ones as far as I'm concerned. It's why not at least try it? Why not spend 2 days of trying it and $100 of trying it? And I love that idea of that company who gives their employees a credit card. And they give them a credit card that they can buy something without having to go through purchasing and without having to get the approval from anybody. They can go and buy something, and then also they give them tokens for how they can use company resources to experiment. And if I limit it, the credit card is not worth a lot of money, but you don't need a lot of money if you think about, how can I do this with the least amount of money? And that's part of innovation. So not a lot of money, you go to Amazon or someplace, you buy it, and you go in the lab, and somebody in the lab is actually helping you work on it. And And then maybe in a few weeks, you give the people a little bit bigger credit card because what their first thing they tried was very well worth it. So it's there can't be any bureaucracy anymore to this. It's too fast to be bureaucratic. So you have to be flexible, but you have to also manage the risk and the exposure within your company. But that's just one little example. But I also believe education has to come first. Neither executives nor engineers are educated the right way. And then also now you scale it back to the schools and you scale it back to the earlier schools. And I think that the schools from the early days on have to prepare people to be successful in these companies. I tell you, today's schools are preparing students very well to be successful in the traditional big companies. They're preparing them very well. And I keep blaming my kindergarten teacher. She was a Franciscan sister. I keep blaming her on having not prepared me well for corporate America. Well, she did the best she could, okay? But I believe that my kids going through American kindergarten have been very well prepared for American corporate culture. They have not been very well prepared for being innovators in traditional American corporate culture. But from the kindergarten on, I believe that my kids have been very well prepared for that career. But I think that has to be worked down a little bit, and maybe some of the needs for creativity that we have discovered now will find their way through colleges, even into high schools and even into grade schools. So I hope so. And
Yeah. And also thanks to the power of internet, many people can now start to learn things on their own. No? And so
yeah,
if you find an idea you want to experiment on it, especially in coding, which is the most important phase of our evolution, because you can basically write a code and tell a computer what to do and it does it. That it have never happened before, you see.
yeah, that
So
is
if
correct.
children can learn how to do this, they will never be short of work. I repeat again, you know. In fact, they will never have to work for somebody. They have to work for themselves because they are the captain of their own industry. This is going to be very, very important. All
Yes,
right.
and
Yeah, please go.
from the very beginning, kids should learn diversity. They should learn that there are many different ways of solving a problem, and they should go out and see as much as possible. Maybe museums, maybe flea markets, you name it. All that stimulates their brain. That will stimulate their creativity. But I think, especially through high school and college, everybody should be aware that there's more than one way of thinking about things. There's more than one way of solving problems. Diversity is something that is real life, and diversity is there. Diversity is very good, and diversity in thinking is excellent. And there's not a lot that schools and colleges have to do to make a big impact on it. And then, of course, the industry, when people are finally there working, has to finish that off and stay with that with those same ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, now we're moving towards the end of the podcast. Of course, we are going to touch a little bit about your book. Can you I mean, your first book, no? I know you are writing the second one also. Can you touch something the key message of this book? Let's share a few minutes there.
Okay, the key, my first book is about what I did at Goodyear over probably 15 years of learning from many companies out there, especially from Toyota and so on, how they completely revolutionized manufacturing, and how that same thinking can be applied to how we do R&D work. And that Goodyear, when we started, it took forever to do anything. It took 5 years, 6, 7 years to develop a tire. And at the end, we were doing the same work in a year and a half. And also there was everything was late when it was delivered, and a few years sudden everything is on time, and you can actually make marketing plans, and the product is there when it's needed, and all those things had a huge big impact. So that's what my first book is about. It's more about the research, the more the traditional research. I mean, it's all tires that go to a known customer. I at that time did not have done enough work on innovation itself. The front face, or the disruptive innovation, or whatever you may want to call it. And I had done some work, but very little of that made it into my first book, and that's why I actually wrote my second book about to take a competent company, to take a company that is a leader in their industry, okay? And then to turn that company into a sustained winner of that whole industry, and how they leverage the innovative thinking and the many other principles of lean or lean manufacturing, or whatever, or of lean innovation by now, because I had the opportunity now to learn from many good companies like Google, like Amazon, like Uber, and so on, and how they became the market leaders. So the question is, how can anybody become a market leader like that, a sustainable force in their industry, by leveraging what I call the principles of lean innovation. So my second book is actually, my first book is a story. It's the story of the transformation at Goodyear. My second book is a totally invented story. It's a business novel. I invented a company, and I'm the company is the leader in their industry, but their profits have been flattened out, and they realized at the right time what they have to do to become a sustained winner in their industry, and they did it. And of course, it has a happy end, of course. But so that's pretty much a lot of the publishing that I have done today. I also publish on other subjects, like how to engage people, how to care for people. And I did a publication recently on industrial ethics, and it's definitely a subject that I will keep writing about, because it's another important subject, I think, that and if I come up with something else in the next few years, I may write about that and share my thinking and my experiences about that.
That's interesting. I want to know, is there a reason why you decided to invent that story in the second book?
Yes, there's a good reason. The main reason I wrote a business novel is because it's so easy to explain things. It's much easier to understand things if you put them in the right context. And the story follows the context, by the way. The context came first. What I was trying to communicate was there first. But then you have so much flexibility to work your story around all that, that it became relatively easy. And there is that kind of, I would say, was the driving force for writing a business novel.
All right, that is absolutely interesting. Thank you so much for that. Now, we are about to close the conversation. Of course, we talked a lot about different arguments relating to, of course, you and your professional work, what you have done, especially in the Goodyear Tire industry company. Sorry. So we talked also a little bit about the war, your experience, and all that. So we talked a lot about interesting things today. Now, to conclude this conversation, maybe that is something you wanted to say that I didn't ask you. How would you like to conclude it? Maybe it's also an advice you want to leave for people or for companies, or it can be anything. Please conclude it in your own way.
Well, yeah, maybe, and thanks for asking that question. I think that's a very good one. I learned everything the hard way, and it started with learning on the farm, and it went through my whole education, and especially at the company. When I started to work at Goodyear, I would say that if there was a way to do it wrong, I did it wrong. If there is a way to get in trouble, I got in trouble. Okay. I made many, many, many mistakes. And especially, I was never comfortable to work with people in the first place. And maybe that's why I became an engineer. I learned an enormous amount of things. And as I said, most of the things I learned them the hard way. And if I had another career, I would do it totally different. Okay. So that led me to the conclusion that, hey, if I can do something meaningful today, why don't I teach folks who are learning now, or who are in a career in a company or whatever? Why don't I share that experience with them so they don't have to go through that very difficult learning curve that I went through? But then I have to take it a lot further. Don't just look at me to learn from. There's many, many people like me who have shared their experiences. So my advice to young people, hey, be a learner. There's so much out there. Just take advantage of it. There's an enormous amount out there on the internet and everywhere. Take advantage of it. Don't come from school into a company and think you know what you are doing, because you do not know at all. And you have to learn through your whole career. And I encourage people to read, to go and find the knowledge that they need. It will help them. And the biggest thing, the saddest part is that it was the same thing for me. I never knew it was out there. I discovered it very late. So my big advice, learn it. And it's out there. Take advantage of it. It will help you. It will help you make a better career. It will help you to make a better life. So that's why I share my experiences, and I hope that people read it and call me and talk to me. I'm very happy to share all of that. I always love to teach, and that has not changed. I still love to teach, and I found something useful to do in retirement. So.
And if there is anything that you have learned throughout these years working with Goodyear, what would you say?
Well, I have learned how to work better, and how to respect people more. And I've learned that if you respect people, you get something back. And I learned that if you care for people, you get something back. And I think that is a very important part that I learned, maybe too late, but I did learn it. And today you cannot be successful as an individual anymore. I think today you can only be successful if you figure out how to do the best you can for everybody and with everybody. And that maybe that was one of the most important things.
I thank you so much. It has been a pleasure on our part, and your conversation has really been very motivating for us. Thank you very much, sir.
Well, thank you for letting me share some time with you.
It has been a pleasure.